got some terms for you. On Michael F. Florio's Starts and Sits, you go to NFL.com/start-sit to see the full list. But you, considering where you are right now and what you're doing, you don't need that. You can just listen to Mike unveil his list right here on NFL Fantasy Live. We'll start with the running back position, and we'll start with the starts. Who's getting in?
There was this guy in my mentions. I should say clown. Like all the first couple of weeks of the season being like, remember when you told me to draft DeAndre Swift? He has no upside whatsoever. How you feeling now?
Oh.
He has just been awesome these last few weeks. Once, as Rank talks about it a lot, once the Bears kind of figured out this running attack, it has been all systems go for DeAndre Swift. And the Bears, since their bye week, third highest rate of running the ball, third highest outside zone run rate, and that just fits DeAndre Swift's skill set. He averages over exactly 6 yards per carry on those outside runs. Only Jonathan Taylor has more explosive runs this year. And the Ravens, they've allowed the second most fantasy points per game to running backs. And what I like about Swift, as you see there, even if the Bears are trailing, he's a weapon in the passing game, so he's not game script dependent.
All right. I'm frantically reinstalling Twitter so that I can find that person and like those tweets because that's fun. We live off spite alone sometimes. So who are we sitting this week at the running back?
That's why I love A.J. Brown. I'm a spiteful guy. Look, this one pains me to say it because he was great for so long. But Alvin Kamara, I don't think this is just a one-week thing anyway. Right now, he's a career low in yards per touch, per carry, per reception, receiving yards per game, success rate, lowest average speed of his career. It's just not good when you get underneath the hood and start looking at some of these numbers. And it's why he's been a top 25 fantasy running back just once in the last 5 games. And then it's a hard matchup. You see there, 80-plus scrimmage yards just one time in the last 7 games against the Bucs. They've held him to fewer than 7 fantasy points in 3 of their last 5 games. So I think it's, even with 6 teams on bye, if you can, I think it's okay to get away from Alvin Kamara. And then I don't do this much, but I need to be on camera right now.
Oh, no.
Because, look, I apologize. I'm waving the white flag. I have been championing TreVeyon Henderson a lot this year, and it's just simply not happening right now. 3 snaps in the first half the other day. And then you're like, okay, cool. When this game gets out of hand, this is the perfect opportunity to give TreVeyon Henderson the ball some. Nope. It was Terrell Jennings. Raise your hand at home if you've heard of Terrell Jennings before last Sunday. Not many of you have, but Mike Vrabel has. And after the game, he's celebrating with him, calling him the 5-minute back. They're just not using TreVeyon. And when they are using him, I hate the way that they are using him because it's all runs up the middle. He is best used in space and out wide. And the Browns, on top of it all, are just an awful matchup. I will say, though, I'm not dropping him because I still think he's a top handcuff, but there's no way you could start him.
Yeah, it's the accountability from Michael F. Florio. And I'll say it, too. We all thought TreVeyon was going to have a solid season. It has not been the case. Let's switch positions and get over to the wide receivers. Who's starting this week?
Rome Odunze. He has just been awesome up until the last 2 weeks. But I think this is a get-right opportunity for the Big Bears wide receiver. Because of the matchup, not only have the Ravens allowed the 5th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers, they've allowed 10 red zone touchdowns, which is the most in the NFL. In the red zone, Odunze has a 25% target share, half of their touchdowns, and half of their end zone targets. And if Lamar is, in fact, back this week, we could see the Bears having to air the ball out. And then I think you start Ladd McConkey as well. 15 targets last week, 24 in his last 2. He's been the first read in that span on nearly a quarter of the passing plays per fantasy points data. And what stood out to me last week, played way more in the slot, 71% of his snaps. The Vikings, they have struggled against slot receivers, especially up the middle, downfield. I am going to talk about that a little bit more later in the show, but I think Ladd McConkey is definitely in play this week.
Yeah, good. A bounce back the past couple of weeks for Ladd, who's bouncing down our rosters into the bench category of wide receiver.
We saw him as one of the most added players earlier this show. Keyshawn Boutte. I think it is just right now, the last couple of weeks have been fun, but they're unsustainable in my opinion because since week 2, less than 3 targets per game. The floor is less than 5 fantasy points, so he is very boom or bust. But this week, he is facing a team that has allowed the third fewest passing yards per game this season. And I'm not sure this is a game where the Patriots are going to have to keep their foot on the gas. We might see them kind of take it easy in the second half a little bit. Either way, if Booty doesn't catch a long touchdown, you're looking at a very low number.
Speaking of starting quarterbacks, time for the quarterbacks and tight ends on Michael F. Florio's starts and sits. The full list is available on NFL.com/start-sit. We'll go to the quarterbacks. Who's your guy this week?
Jackson Dart. And I'm begging all of you out there, please add him. I don't know what more he has to do or we have to do on this network to get you to add Jackson Dart. But you see there, 19 or more fantasy points in 3 of 4 starts. 4 total touchdowns and a QB2 finish last week against arguably the best defense in the NFL. 22 fantasy points per game since becoming a starter. But what I love, he has ran for 50 yards in 3 of 4. He has scored a rushing touchdown in 3 of 4. That is elite rushing upside. That is why we love Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels in fantasy. And Dart is doing that. And if you're like, oh, well, the matchup's tough. Yeah, he finishes the QB3 just 2 weeks ago against the Eagles. With 6 teams on bye, I think you very much so have to start Jackson Dart. And from one Giants quarterback to a former one, I'm calling him Daniel Dimes here. But I will take the L for doubting him season long. But lately, the last couple of weeks, been saying to start him, and it has been working out. Over 22 fantasy points in each of the last 2 games. And if you read the column, you know my theory is you play Jones against teams that do not generate pressure at a high rate. And the Titans have done so at the 7th lowest rate in the NFL. So I think this is a good week for Daniel Jones, especially with all those buys.
All right, yeah, congratulations on a bounce back. It could be a comeback player of the year without having to come back from anything for Daniel Jones.
Come back from the Giants.
Yeah, playing for the Giants. Let's go to the bench. Who's getting on it this week?
Look, in the game of the week this week, one side has love and the other side has so much hatred. But I'm going to go against love on this one. I think you sit Jordan Love against the Steelers because he has scored fewer than 15 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. It's not really his fault, but the Packers are throwing the ball at the 4th lowest rate in the NFL. When they get in the red zone, they are running the ball at a high rate. When they get near on the goal line, it's all Josh Jacobs. So my fear is that this is a revenge-fueled game that leads to both quarterbacks maybe throwing more than usual. But Love has been all floor and not really much ceiling. So I get it if you can't get away because of the buys, but if you have another option, I think you take it. You go in the other way.
The buys playing into all our decisions. We got the tight end 1 and the tight end 7 sitting out, getting some rest this week. Who we starting at tight end?
You're going to start Dalton Kincaid. And I know some of you might be like, you're a homer, but you all watched the Bills last Monday night, and you saw with your very own eyes how much they missed Dalton Kincaid's presence in that offense. Plus, despite missing last week, he leads the Bills in receiving yards and touchdowns. His 24% target rate is tied with Khalil Shakir for the most on the Bills. And then fantasy-wise, 14 or more fantasy points in 3 of 5, and at least 7 in each game. So at the thinnest position in the game, that is a high ceiling and a safe floor. So in a great matchup where the Panthers top 6 in yards and fantasy points allowed, you play Kincaid.
And it's a tough sit because a lot of folks need a lot of help, but who should they put on the bench if they have to?
Zach Ertz. I have Zach Ertz in a couple of leagues myself, and I'm going with some streaming options over him this week. Just 6.5 fantasy points per game with Marcus Mariota compared to 12 per game with Jaden Daniels. It's a tough matchup. The Chiefs have allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game, 5th fewest yards, 2 tight ends. And again, it's a good streaming week. Some names I would take a shot on over Zach Ertz or Kyle Pitts, Cade Otton, and one I'm going to talk about later in the show, but Mason Taylor.
Bringing us to higher or lower because you get the projections over on your fantasy app as well as NFL.com. We're going to tell you whether or not the score will be higher or lower than that projection, starting with the man who's starting on Thursday Night Football, Justin Herbert, higher or lower than 17.6 fantasy points.
We're going with Bolt Yellow to say higher for Justin Herbert this week because he has just been playing good football this season, especially as of late. He has topped this number in 2 straight games, and in that span, he has 5 passing touchdowns. And I think the Eagles found a weakness in this Vikings defense. It is up the middle, and it is attacking downfield that way. And that is where Ladd McConkey, Keenan Allen, all of these pieces can be utilized. And so I think with the running game struggling a little bit for the Chargers, I think we see Justin Herbert throw a lot this week.
All right, so congratulations to Justin Herbert managers. As you can expect, higher Rain Dakota Prescott playing at the Denver Broncos, who looked like a great defense other than like first 3 quarters Jackson Dart, higher or lower ranked than 17.3 fantasy points.
You know, I'm going to take the higher for Dak Prescott here. I think it's well-deserved. I know that you and I have been two of seemingly the lone voices in trumpeting Dak Prescott as one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, and this season has been absolutely fantastic. He's had 14 touchdowns and no giveaways in his last 4 games. He's had at least 5 games with at least 22 fantasy points, and he's been doing a large part of this without CeeDee Lamb. He's been going out there and making it happen. He's had guys like Fergie right here, George Pickens go out there and help him out, but Dak Prescott quietly has become one of the top quarterbacks in the league. And so normally I know people would look at this Denver matchup and say, this is tough. Should I start him? I think there's no hesitation. If you drafted Dak Prescott as your starting quarterback, like as I did in a lot of spots, I have no worries about this matchup at all.
All right, so a loud start for Dak Prescott. Speaking of loud, Cam Scatterby has done nothing quietly in his entire existence. 14.2 fantasy points, higher or lower, Mike, against the Eagles.
Oh, we on this show, we were trying to tell you before the year started, and we did a redraft of the first round on the NFL Fantasy Football Show on Monday. Cam Scatterby was a first-round pick because all he's done is dominate volume since he's become the starter. You see their 22 touches. He is their red zone offense. When they get near the goal line, they are going his direction. And he has topped this number, 14.2, in 3 straight and 4 of his last 5. The last time they played Philly 2 weeks ago, he put up 31 fantasy points. That was the most points any player has scored against the Eagles this season. So, yeah, I mean, on touchdowns alone, he might clear this number. I think another big day is in store for Cam Scatterby, who is just game script independent. Like, when they're losing, they throw to him. When they're winning, they run. He's awesome.
Works out every time. And also, we've been higher on every single player thus far. Let's see if we keep it going. We've got Chuba Hubbard back. They're splitting carries. Higher or lower for Rico Dowdle against the Buffalo Bills, 11.9 right?
Oh, Patrick, we keep going higher, and I'm going to keep this streak going. I'm going to say that, I'm going to say he clears 12 fantasy points this week. Obviously, it's a different situation now that Chuba Hubbard has returned. We would love it. We would love it if Rico Dowdle was the solo back there. However, I like the matchup against the Buffalo Bills, who've allowed the most rushing yards to running backs this season. They've allowed the second most rushing touchdowns, 8 this year. They've given up a lot of production on the ground. So I think that with Carolina's quarterback situation going with Andy Dalton this week, they're really going to be leaning on this rushing attack. I think it's good games for both Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard. If you have either one of those players, you should feel confident this week.
Rico Dowdle, a successful revenge game earlier this season, an unsuccessful revenge game for Chris Olave against Dennis Allen last week. But he did have 2 touchdowns, and we have 2 touchdowns in the game.
He had 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, you have 2 touchdowns in the game where the opposing defensive coordinator, who you want revenge against, gets the game ball. That's something to celebrate. So keep the streak going, Mike. Make him higher against the Buccaneers.
I'm going to be the one that unfortunately breaks it. I'm going to say lower. I don't think it's lower by much, but this number right here, 15.9, he's come close a couple of other times, but he has only topped it once. That was last week. He's getting a lot of volume. You see there, 71 targets, second most amongst wide receivers. The issue is the stat that's behind it. What is happening? What is those targets are getting turned into, which is not a whole lot of fantasy points. And the Bucs are a pretty tough matchup. They've only allowed 15 or more fantasy points to a wide receiver 4 times this year. And it's like Amon-Ra, JSN, like the top options in fantasy. So I like Olave. I'm starting him in a couple of leagues. That just feels like a big number.
All right, so the projection too high to keep our streak going. Let's wrap it up with Xavier Worthy against the Commanders, ranked 10.8 fantasy points, higher or lower?
This is a tough one for me. I'm going to go higher on this one. I think he gets somewhere in the neighborhood to 11 and 12 fantasy points. This is going to be a very difficult situation for managers moving forward because with the emergence of Rashee Rice, his return to the NFL last week, it really shows the depth of the wide receiver room for the Kansas City Chiefs. It's going to be one of those situations, especially in these Bimageddon type spots where you're desperate for, especially in leagues where you have to start 3 wide receivers, you're desperate for somebody and you have to pick a player on an offense that you really like. And you got to like the matchup as well. The Commanders have allowed the 7th most yards per target to wide receivers this season, the 10th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. And in a matchup, in a primetime game, stuff like this, you always want to have a little bit of fun, have something going. So I would anticipate Xavier Worthy doing pretty well this week.
Remember way back in the history when we were worried about the Kansas City Chiefs, and now the entire division loses? Other
Mahomes
than
going to win the MVP.
They're in a
gonna
great
be the
spot.
Super Bowl
They're going to the
favorites.
Super Bowl. They're literally going to the Super Bowl.